Hi everyone, Kareen Erbe here with Broken Ground, and I'm here in my greenhouse. And in my last video, my top 5 lessons from the season's garden, I mentioned rehabilitating my greenhouse soil and how that was one of my lessons this year that I learned that I needed to pay a little bit more attention to it. So though the early spring was great with my growing out my seedlings in here and doing early season greens, by the middle of the summer, I noticed that there was a fungal disease on some of my tomatoes, and I also have struggled with spider mites in here for the past few years. So I decided to do a little bit of a rehab on this space. It's not a full-on rehab, but we'll see what happens here. And I think the important thing is to, try a strategy out, and then you accept the feedback next year to see what's working and what's not. So what I've done is I've taken one of these main beds, and in this main bed, I scraped off the top probably about 5 inches of soil, at least 5 to 6 inches of soil. Took that out of the greenhouse and have transferred it into some of my beds outside where they need a little bit more loft because we have such heavy clay soil. And with the confidence that I think that whatever fungal disease is in that soil probably won't transfer out there as much or won't proliferate outside as much because it just doesn't get as hot. Like the problems that I see in my greenhouse are when it's getting super hot in here and because there's less ventilation. And so I think outside, again, with a garden that's connected to the elements, the wind, the rain, the soil, you have less you need less intervention. Let's say that. So for that one big bed, I've scraped off that top 5-6 inches, and I brought in material from outside. So my pond out there, I thinned a bunch of pond plants, brought those in, took some algae, skimmed that algae off, put that in there. Had a bunch of vermicompost from the 2 vermicomposting buckets that I'll show you in a little bit. Had a bunch of that, put that in there. Leaves from last season, because I have a whole new bags and bags of leaves from this season. Wanted to get rid of those leaves that are partially broken down. Brought those in. Brought in some extra compost from a local composting service as well. And then we do have a small pond that mostly grows azolla in it. And again, that's nutrient-rich water that we're adding to this bed. So always trying to bring in that moisture too, because of course, soil microorganisms rely on it being moist like a wrung-out sponge. So those are some of the techniques that I've used, and we'll see what happens. But also, I'll show you some of the other things that I'm doing in my greenhouse as well. So down in this back corner, this is the northeast corner of the greenhouse, and it is typically a corner. I've tried to grow a bunch of different things in here, and it's just too shaded. And again, early season greens grow okay in here when the sun angle is lower. But what I've decided to do, because this corner, like this part of the bed is fine, you can still see some nasturtiums that are growing there. This part of the bed still gets enough light, adequate light to grow, but this corner right here, next year what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do some worm farming in here. So I'm gonna divide it up into maybe 3 or possibly just 2 and have like a hardware cloth between the 2, and I'm going to start layering my kitchen scraps, leaves, and red wiggler worms in here. And so they're just gonna start building more soil for me in here that I'm gonna then dig out and transfer to another area of either the greenhouse or the garden. So I feel like finally, after several years of experimenting with this back corner, I finally found a really good use for it. Because again, your worms want to be in the shade as well, and you're just gonna have to keep that moist enough over there. I wanted to also show you these bins that I have in the greenhouse, and this is the vermicastings that I added to the greenhouse bed. So in here I have a bunch of worms, and leaves. And what I do is I dump my kitchen scraps in here, cover it with leaves, add some water, and then the worms get to work and reduce this all into usable black gold. So every time I come in here, I add another layer of kitchen scraps and another layer of leaves and enough moisture. And this is just kind of like a little cap on top. This method is inspired by Jerome Ozentowski from the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, who teaches this as worm farming. Really effective method in terms of dealing with your kitchen scraps. So the stuff that these worms generated from last year or this past season, I'm putting that also in the greenhouse soil, and you can see all the worms growing in here. And this is all just kitchen scraps and leaves that I've added. So you can see a ton of them right there. So that's one of my other soil building techniques. So this is another soil building technique that I use in my greenhouse. So I have this garden bed over here on this side that I'm starting to rehabilitate, like I said, with all of those materials that I mentioned. This bed I still have to work on. I just wanted to let some things grow again in here, and there's still some nasturtium going on, so I haven't yet started to rehabilitate this bed. But between the two, and here's is a little mini pathway, and if you open up this pathway and this area is connected to these two beds, okay? So if you open up this pathway, this is another place where I put kitchen scraps in here. I've inoculated it with red wiggler worms, and then I just put the leaves on top, water it in, close it up like that, and then that whole area gets converted into worm castings, which I can either dig out directly from there, or because it's continuous here, just right below this level, it is continuous with the soil here. So it just kind of naturally also, that fertility migrates into these beds. So those are a few of the techniques that I'm using this year to rehabilitate some of the soil in my greenhouse. I may, and I'm gonna see how things are looking in the spring, I may also cover crop one of these beds because voles don't get into this area because they're really high raised beds. I may cover crop one of these beds. So I am considering one of these main beds, just having it be fallow or cover cropping it. Again, just resting it, taking a pause, just so that we can let some of those natural systems and those soil microorganisms proliferate and that kind of nutrient content increase. So let me know if you have any questions, or maybe what you do or what you've done to rehabilitate the soil in your greenhouse. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.